Thank you so much, Commissioner. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here. The honor is, and in so many ways, what you all have done in Anastasia is a remarkable testament to what a community and responsible individuals who are serving that community can do to make a difference in so many lives. I've been blessed in the past 30 or 40 years to visit mosquito control districts all over the world. And what is happening here at Anastasia, particularly with this education center, is something that is so unique, so remarkable, that I think that all of you at night should sleep very soundly, even though poor Richard probably is undergoing some significant sleep deprivation. What I'd like to do is talk a few minutes about the development of what is a remarkable project that our species has been involved in dealing with a six-legged blood-sucking pest. Jeff Parker is a cartoonist who's retired from Florida today. And Jeff has been kind enough over the years to send me copies of his cartoons. And I'd like to use two this evening to suggest to you something about the nature of this place that we live in. Florida is unique in its mosquito population. It's unique in the numbers and in the magnitude of that. I've seen counts of mosquitoes in the Everglades and in Cape Canaveral National Seashore in which the count has been measured in pounds. And a pound of mosquitoes is roughly 1,100,000 mosquitoes. Lee Wenner, who was one of our mosquito control commissioners in Brevard County, went out and did a count on one of our barrier islands and was able to identify over 12,000 Aedes sollicitans and Aedes tuberculosis mosquito eggs, which means that in that square foot of land, theoretically, in about 50 days, 516 million mosquitoes could rise up and, like a dark, undulating cloud, make its way around, bringing to those who are on the receiving end something of a considerable amount of sadness. The word mosquito comes into our usage here in Florida in 1568 when a Jesuit named Villarreal was sent to evangelize the Colusa Indians. He writes rather eloquently about what took place and was ever so thankful that his provincial abbot called him back because the mosquitoes were so onerous where he was that the native population would bury themselves in the sand. The word mosquito enters the English language in 1589 in Spencer's Faerie Queene. And we know today that around the planet there are about 3,500 species of mosquitoes, and we in Florida have in excess of 80 different species. About 1 million people die, or their lives have been significantly curtailed by mosquitoes. I changed this slide because I think it's important as we enter an election year. In 1845, Florida became a state. And on the day of the first inauguration of the first governor of what had become the new state, there was a temporary flag that was made up. And the flag had emblazoned on it 3 words, "Let us alone." And I believe they were speaking about mosquitoes, not about what they feared to be the feds that might come down and change things. And Florida almost didn't become a state in 1845 because Congressman John Randolph stood up in the House of Representatives and said that that place you're thinking about making a state is a land of quagmires, frogs, alligators, and mosquitoes. And the alligators and frogs were fine, but the mosquitoes, Randolph said, there was nothing that could be done about them. And I hadn't intended to do this, but I'm going to read you a passage from one of the greatest writers in the 20th century in Florida, Zora Neale Hurston, who in 1929 went to O'Galley, which is now part of Melbourne, and collected the stories that became her first book called Mules and Men. And in it, she's got a passage, and I'm going to read this in the dialect that it was written, about our part of the world. Well, one Christmas time, God was going to Palatka, and the devil was in the neighborhood too, and he seen God going down the long, big road, so he jumped behind a stump and hid. Not that he was scared of God, but he they didn't want to get no Christmas gifts from God. So God was walking on, and the devil, he jumped out behind the stump and yelled, Christmas gift, Christmas gift. God just kept on walking and said over his shoulder, take the East Coast. That's why we got so many storms here and mosquitoes. It's the devil's country. Now we who live in zip code 666 know something about the devil's country with that 516 million mosquitoes that can come as a brood and descend upon us. We know also a great deal more about the mayhem that those mosquitoes made. Between 1867 and 1888, there were 9 yellow fever outbreaks in Key West. 1888 in Jacksonville. The city had 25,000 people living in it, 10,000 people fled. They had a shotgun quarantine around the city. And if you did have trouble with masks in the 21st century, if you came into an area in which there was yellow fever, you had to go into a mandatory quarantine for 10 days. And that's one of the reasons why there was a state board of health formed, because Joseph Porter, who was the physician attending in that, he was asked in February 1889 to form a state board of health, which began the important work of dealing with diseases. In 1922, 100 years ago, Gary Clark, who was one of the great U.S. Public Health Service officers who worked around the world, he was able to make the argument that there were 250,000 cases of dengue from Brownsville, Texas, around the Gulf Coast to Tampa. 250,000 cases of what dengue was also known as break bone fever. It's also known as Dante fever because you walked for months because of the neuralgia, because of the pain that is from. Right now, 3.5 billion people on this planet live in a zone in which dengue is possibly transmitted by Aedes aegypti, Aedes albopictus, and you've got in your insectary here people that are doing work on those 2 mosquitoes. Dengue, we'll talk about in a moment, is back on the rise. And if you look at America in terms of malaria, I've talked to infectious disease physicians quite a lot. Most infectious disease physicians here have not seen a case of malaria unless it was some visiting. But if you go to Africa, or you go to many places, you'll find that malaria is still a devastating disease producing lassitude, ruining lives, countless. And as of course, we have the host of diseases like Tripoli, St. Louis, encephalitis, West Nile, and most recently, the case of Zika that broke out, 200 cases down in South Florida. The amazing thing, and this, I'll admit to this, mosquitoes have been very good to me. They've given me a career. They've allowed me to write books. They've allowed me to study. They've allowed me to meet wonderful scientists around the world. But the amazing thing is how little we knew about mosquitoes until so recently. In my research, until the 1870s, there was no medical textbook published in Europe or the United States that identified a single disease that was vectored by an insect. And then in the 1880s, first ticks with cattle fever, Nansen in Formosa, now Taiwan, with filariasis, and then Carl Finley makes the argument about Aedes aegypti and yellow fevers, then it was substantiated. A. King makes a statement about malaria, but then in the 1890s, Ronald Ross and Giovanni Thrassi identified malaria in human beings and mosquitoes. Then you have 1900, the Reed Commission, and then in 1902, Harrison Graham and Thomas Bancroft identified dengue. So in the course of 15 years, diseases that have devastated human populations are identified with a 6-legged blood-sucking pest, and suddenly there's this explosion of interest in mosquitoes and what can be done about them. And the result of that was a host of developments, which we're, in many respects in Florida, in the vanguard of. Because it was in Florida that one of the earliest anti-mosquito associations was formed. I was telling Commissioner Moore, we're at the centenary on the 7th of December in 1922. 150 men and women gathered in Daytona Beach in the Palmetto House and decided that they were going to do something about mosquitoes. And the striking thing about this, as I look at 5 women commissioners, is that women were at the foreground of that. The mayor of Daytona Beach was a doctor named Josie Rogers, first woman mayor of Daytona Beach. Another woman named Vita McDonald in Jacksonville, whose husband was the local health officer. Those 2 women, another woman over at Inverness, organized and were the catalysts, after having won the right to vote, to take questions of public health and put them in front of people. And those 150 people formed the Florida Anti-Mosquito Control Association. They elected an executive board of which 2 members were women, and the 3rd president of that body was Vita McDonald. The challenges we face in the 21st century are in some ways strikingly similar to challenges that were faced in the past. In the 1920s, when men and women said that we can do something about mosquitoes, they were oftentimes met with guffaws. You can do more about thunderstorms than you will be able to do about mosquitoes. Individuals were saying things like, this is pouring money into a pit, nothing can be done. But individuals 100 years ago prevailed. And they did it by careful attention to several things. One, to research, to approaching the problems that were before them, not in a haphazard way, but in a way in which they studied. And then, second thing they did, is they realized that the path to effective mosquito control is the path of education. Sometimes people will point out that mosquito control was very much enhanced by the building of the Panama Canal. And you're absolutely right. The Panama Canal would not have been built without the control of mosquitoes. But the model of the Panama Canal was that General Gordan could send a private out with a gun and say, if you don't police your area, we're going to put you in the stockade or we're going to fine you. You cannot make effective mosquito control by police action. You can make effective mosquito control by winning the public. And that's why I had such, and do have such great respect for what you are doing in your education center, because you take a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 73-year-old and walk them through a facility like that, and they will be changed. It is that Saul Paul moment on the road to the swamp, barrier island, where you see that something can be done. That is transformative. So, what challenges do we face in the 21st century? In my work, I think these triad, globalization, mosquitoes that were not here, coming from abroad. In 1985-86, Aedes albopictus arrived in used tires in Harris County, Texas. Today, it's the principal pest mosquito outside New Brunswick, New Jersey. Globalization. Changes in land use. Every time I come to your wonderful county, I'm amazed how fast we're growing. Areas that formerly were soft palmetto and pine trees are now stripped bare, and people are making lives. That's pushing our population into contact with flora and fauna that we previously haven't been in contact with. We know of 500 different viruses out there. We don't know the names, that they're out there. What transmissive consequences might they have if they find a vector in a human population? And of course, climate change. We're all aware that things are altering. And that will have consequences. Will it mean, and it's a debate, will it mean that as the subtropics move to higher latitudes, will it mean that diseases that we associate with the subtropics and the tropics will move with them? We don't know the answer to that. What consequence? And the only way we will know them is by thinking about those questions before the challenges are presented to us. I'm not a scientist, but I enjoy spending time with scientists. Diseases like dengue, 3.5 billion people, in that slide you can see, area. 230 million cases of dengue. Blaine Goodler, who's superb, he's the person on this. 2 million cases. And with dengue, there are four, you don't know this, I'm sure, 4 serotypes of dengue. It used to be if you got dengue 1, you'd never get dengue 1 again. But the challenge with globalization is that now all 4 serotypes are blended together. And if you get dengue 1 and then get dengue 2, your likelihood of getting dengue hemorrhagic fever or dengue shock goes up. And that will devastate. So in a sense, we've created this dengue cocktail, which is lurking on the shelf, and the mosquito, Albopictus or aegypti, is only too willing to make itself an opportunity for us to have a public health disaster. I was telling Rudy this morning, Zika, fascinating disease. I'd known the name of it. The man you see in the shorts is named Alexander Haddad. He went on to become the dean of medicine medical school at Edinburgh. His son was my father's physician, so that's why I know something about this Haddow family. In 1947, Haddow took a rhesus monkey and put it up in the canopy. On, I think it was the 17th of April, he took its temperature. It was fine. On the 18th, he took its temperature, and it wasn't. He took it down, and he identified for the first time Zika virus. 5 years later, there's 1 human case of Zika. Jump forward then to 2007. And in that entire period, around the world, 14 cases of Zika. And then we see what happens in 9 years, where you have 22 countries in America presenting at the beginning of 2016, 500,000 cases. 500,000 cases. Now, this is a remarkable story about globalization. Lyle Peterson, some of you may know, is head of virology at CDC, and I were talking about this, and how does it happen? Well, I went and got an airplane map about tourists and about rowing teams and competition. We became the biomagnifiers. By something that's a blessing that we all can get on an airplane, go a long way and see our relatives, see something that we haven't seen before. But in going that way, we can take with us and we can transfer. And that has consequences. And I would suggest to you that the work you do here is so important so that the person who gets on the airplane and goes someplace far and comes back and doesn't feel quite right might just think about what's gone wrong. And also in medical circumstances, what we can do about that. The book that I'm working on, I've got my manuscript, my wife is reading right now another book, but the book that I'm trying to write now is about this man, Maurice Provost, who's one of the great heroes of the 20th century. Just a remarkable guy. And he observed back in 1962, the day is gone when we can improve our relations with our fellow man or fellow animals simply by reaching for a gun. We need to understand, and for this, we must learn. And so we need only to learn and learn and learn more to appreciate our natural environment. It's full of wonder and beauty. And if we learn something about practical phenomena, such as the milieu of birds, mosquitoes, and viruses, so much the better. And that's what you are doing. You are educators. And you have here in this district an opportunity, I think, to become a light on the hill. Not only for Anastasia, not only for St. John's, but I promise, I mean, I'm not going to buy the airplane tickets, but I would suspect that scholars and scientists and technicians are going to come to this place and people are going to say they did the right thing for their citizens, for their colleagues, and for mosquito control. Well, Jeff Parker has lots of cartoons, and before I go to them, his tribute to Rudy, I spent some time in China, Sun Tzu, in The Art of War. observation that is apt for mosquito control. He who knows the enemy and himself will never in 100 battles be at risk. On the other side of that is a German teacher who says, to forget one's purpose. Forget one's purpose is the commonest form of stupidity. So back to Jeff Parker and his cartoons. You guys are mosquito repellents. You are the mosquito repellent for a lot of people that don't know to say thank you. But that repellent needs always to be aware that it has to be refurbished and continued. I grew up with my mother reading me Charlotte's Web. And there's a line in it that's kind of frightening. People aren't as smart as bugs. But we got to try harder, and we can be smart. Thank you all for letting me prattle at you for this while. There will be no midterm exam. You've all made A's. Thank you.
You know, Dr. Patterson, it is a